Hi, everyone. You are watching Intuitive Briefcase. And I want to just remind you, if you would please, please, please just subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It keeps our channel up and going. And I really do appreciate it. Today, we're talking to a really special guest. She has a doctorate in biology. She has been tested by the Rhine Institute for her intuitive abilities. She has been prophetic all of her life. She's had remarkable experiences. And this is the first time I believe that she's really discussed this publicly. So let's welcome to the show, Melody Marley. So welcome to the show, Melody.
Thank you. Um, Good morning.
I we got a little bounce going on there, so be careful with your device there. But I just want to tell the audience that even though you've had an enormous amount of just really interesting things happen to you, that you've known things in the future all of your life, this isn't something that has been natural to you as far as your upbringing, because you grew up in a very conservative household. Is that right?
That is correct. As a matter of fact, it was considered evil to know anything in advance. My family would be very upset if they would even know I was talking about it. I waited to talk about it until they passed away. So both of my parents have passed, and my whole family's passed away. My brothers, my mother, my father. So I'm the last one living. And but they were extremely conservative.
Yeah, and they were religious, and they felt like this was something of the devil or an evil kind of thing that
That is
but you were so young when some of these experiences began to happen to you. I think the earliest one that you told me about, you were about 4 years of age. Is that right? Tell me
that
about that experience where the fire happened and you were aware of it.
Yes, I was in my bed and I could hear something saying fire, fire. Well, I was so young, I thought, I've got to tell my mama. I've got to get up. I've got to go tell my mom. So I woke my mother up and I said, Mama, fire. And she looked at me and said, Where? And she jumped up. She woke my father up. They went all around the house, couldn't find anything. And they thought that I was just going crazy or something, had a nightmare or some kind of weirdness. And so they all went back to bed. Well, the next morning, the detached garage it was the thing that had been on fire. And my father decided that maybe I had been playing with matches in the night, went out to the garage and started the fire. How else would I know that there was a fire? And so he went outside and he investigated things, and the fire had been in this trash can and it got all over the walls and caused smoke damage and really messed up the garage. And he got hold of me and he shook me and he said, "What? What did you do? How come you did this?" And I said, "I didn't do it, And I said, "I just knew." And he said, "How did you know?" I said, Something said it to me. That's how I knew. Something said it to me." "Well, who said it to you?" And I said, "No, no person, Dad. I just knew." And well, finally, he discerned after much getting on to me and thus and so that he had put out his cigar, dumped it into the trash can, and that's what had started the fire. And I was vindicated, and they just decided, well, maybe she kind of saw it or knew it or something, but they couldn't give any validity to the fact that I knew it in advance.
So
So
before this happened, were you asleep during the night and you woke up hearing this, or had you not gone to sleep yet or to bed yet? What was the
I was
circumstances this came to you?
I was kind of in a twilight sleep. I was not quite asleep and not quite awake. And then I heard fire, fire. And I thought, oh, I got to tell my mom there's a fire. And but I was so young that my cognitive processes were so young, that's all I could think of was tell mama.
Well,
So,
of course, yeah, you're 4 years of age. What else can you do? That's a very young age to decipher that. So you didn't know where the fire was. It was just you heard those words, fire, fire, and you felt like you needed to alert your parents
yes,
of this.
yes,
And there was a fire.
there absolutely was.
Yeah,
It had
exactly.
burned up
So,
the whole
yeah.
garage.
And was that the first time you can remember anything like that happening?
Yes, that was the first time. The second time was when I actually my grandfather came to me. I was asleep this time, and he woke me up in my dream, I suppose, or something. And he woke me up, and he said, "People are going to say I'm dead, but you're always going to be able to see me." He said, "I'll come to you time and time again, And he said, but everyone else is going to be pretty upset, but I don't want you to be upset. And then he told me at that time that I had a special gift, that I could see things and do things, that I was born with a call and I have a special gift. And, I didn't know what he was talking about. I'm 5 years old. I just said, okay, Grandpa, and smiled at him. And, and he went on to tell me that, everybody was going to be upset. There was going to be a funeral, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided, being the kind of child I was, I would tell my mother. And so when my mom woke up, I told her, I said, Grandpa's dead. Well, she was terribly upset because that was her father. And she said, don't you ever say anything about my father like that. And she slapped me. And she said, I know you see things before they happen sometimes, but you don't say that about my dad. And then the phone rang just shortly after that, and they were telling my mother that he had passed away. So she was very upset that I knew ahead of time, couldn't figure out how I knew. And I tried to tell her, but she didn't believe me.
So in
So
that incident, when your grandfather came to you, were you asleep in a dream or were you awake and could actually physically see him?
I could see him.
Okay, so you were awake. Were you in bed or still in your bedroom or?
I was in bed in my bedroom, and I had been asleep, and it's like he woke me up and said, this is what's going to happen. And I just accepted it. Back then, when you're a small child like that, you just think everything's normal. So I just thought, okay, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and
So, and he looked just like he was alive and just,
yes,
standing in your bedroom and talking to you, having a conversation with you.
he sure did. Hmm.
Yeah. I've heard of
Yeah.
that before. I remember one situation where a woman was telling me that she was in her kitchen and her mother appeared to her, just like as if she were, standing in the room with her. She knew that she wasn't because, she wasn't there a few minutes before that, and suddenly she came to her and explained, some things and that she had passed. And then she got the call that her mother had passed, but her mom managed to make it to her for a short time before she moved on and say goodbye to her. So, has your grandfather contacted you since then? Have you been able to talk to him the way he said that you would be able to?
Yes, I have. I've talked to him many times. He's warned me of many things that have happened in my life. He comes to me usually in the same manner. When I'm sleeping, he'll wake me up and he'll say, this is going to happen or that, and it does. And I can always trust in what he has to say. So,
Would,
and I've seen him many times.
were you exceptionally close to this particular grandfather? What was your relationship like with him?
I was very close with him, and he used to take me to the candy store, and we talked a lot. And he was an American Indian, and my mother was half American Indian, um, and he taught me things about herbs and plants and things like that when I was a little kid. And I've retained some of it, very little, but some of it. And but he used to take me in the woods. I remember I had a wart one time, and he showed me the right plant to get rid of the wart, and things like that. We were very close. Yes,
Did it get rid of the wart?
yes, it did. It
What
sure
what
did.
was what was the plant? Do you know?
Well, it was a plant that was growing in stump water, and I always thought it was the stump water that did it, and the minerals and things from the stump water. And I use that in the future with warts that have came up on my hands before, and I just take a stick and dip it in the stump water, put it on the wart, and it does dissipate. It goes away. So
Wow.
whatever the minerals are in that stump water worked beautifully.
Now, you went on to become a biologist. Is that right? Was that what your degree was in?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So you would have had some understanding possibly of the chemical interaction that was going on with that wart in the stump water. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It would kill the fungus. That's what it
Yeah.
would do. Yeah. Mhm. So
Well,
it,
that's kind of amazing. Now, your grandfather saying that he was Native American, that's really interesting because, I'm fairly intuitive and see the future as well. And my father has Native American blood coming down pretty close at hand. I think his grandmother was full-blooded. So
mm,
it's a small amount for me, but it's still present. Do you think that had any bearing on the way that you were able to see the future?
I don't have any idea. Like I said, this is the very first time I've even talked about it because it was such a taboo thing with my family. It was considered demonic, evil, bad, and I'm just now opening up and studying about it. So I would have no idea.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have shoveled this down into lower realms of not talking about it simply because of the taboo. And there is a lot of taboo about the subject. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the subject. As you and I were talking before we started this podcast, even that for us, it's always been a positive thing. It's always been either a positive warning of something. And for me, I took it into, just finding, wonderful positive opportunities for either for other people or even for myself that was sitting out there, being able to identify future events. For you, it was more like just a natural download where you would have that information, either your grandfather coming to you or some other way or means that you just knew things that were beyond our five senses, of course. Now, when you went to the Rhine Institute, they did study your capacity. What did you experience there? How did you get invested in even going to start with?
They came to my college that I was going to college at UMKC, and they came to the college and asked if anyone would like to participate. I was a broke college student. I needed the money. They offered $50, and at that time, $50 was pretty good money. So I decided to go ahead and participate because I knew that I had had these experiences when I was younger, so maybe I had some ability. And so I went with them and they tested me for clairvoyance. They tested me for the ability to remote view, the ability to communicate, send and receive. And I have the paperwork from it. And I had ability in all of those, but mainly in the ability to receive and send. And then clairvoyance too. I can touch things and kind of tell where they've been and things about them. So, but it was a lot of fun. And if I wanted to, I could have stayed and done it a lot longer. But I had to get back to college. So,
I
but
understand. Now, how did they go about testing this? Do you remember what the protocol was on testing?
yes, each one had its own protocol. The When I did the sending and receiving, we would be in separate rooms. I was in a room, and they would put another person in another room, and they would show me shapes. And they had these different shapes: a star, a moon, a circle, a square, wavy lines, things like that. And then I would look at the shape and try to send it to someone or receive it from them. And then on the remote viewing, they had a specific site they wanted me to view. I was in another room by myself, and I was able to focus on it and then tell them what I saw. And I was accurate with it. I used to be able to find my mother's purse all the time. She used to lose her purse constantly, and I could find her purse all the time. And then I had a friend of mine that lost his wallet, and he called me and he said, I've lost my wallet, all my money's in it. Oh no. And I said, yeah. And I said, I think I see it. I can see it. It's underneath the pool table at Rosa's Cantina. And I could see it. And he went there and it was exactly where I said it was. So I do have the ability to do that too, but I haven't really delved into it and used it much.
Yeah,
So,
that's a really interesting process to be able to find objects for people. I know there was a woman I was working with once, and she called and she was actually on a trip to Europe. She needed her passport desperately by the morning, and she couldn't find it anywhere. So for me, it was more like bits and pieces. I'm not as maybe as direct in going to it, but I could give her hints as to where it was. And I kept seeing this image of like an English setting, an old English setting, of some sort. The clothing was fit that setting. There was, the furniture in this image that I kept seeing. It was really close to something that looked like that. And I could see it between a stack of papers of some sort. And, it was there and it was just below wherever that image was. Well, she kind of gave up and didn't know what to do. She was so frustrated and she just hung up the phone. She called me back a few minutes later and she had a picture hanging on the wall of the image that I was telling her and a file cabinet just below that. She started looking through the file cabinet, the top drawer of the file cabinet, in between a bunch of papers. It had been misplaced in the wrong file, but that's where it was.
no,
So she was able to find her passport, of course, which was kind of an interesting thing. But oftentimes it's sometimes difficult to find stuff, around people.
yeah.
And I've often looked at things, and especially people because they move around a lot. And, I've tried to search for people, but finding them, you have to almost get a time and a place where they're going to be. But yeah, it sounds like you were very helpful in that way with a lot of people. So they were willing to use your ability to find the purse, but thought it was a little bit
Well,
devilish
my
in nature.
there was a show on TV that came on once a week, and it was My Favorite Martian,
Yes.
and he had little antennas, and so my dad started calling to make it more comfortable for him. He'd say to me, "Is your antenna up?" And I'd say yes, because that's I didn't know what else to call it. And I was kind of forbidden when I lived at home to look into it at all because of the religious things that they believed in. And so I just said, yeah, my antenna's up. And on different things that's happened. I can tell you another story about that if you're interested. But
Yeah,
on
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
okay, well, we were living at what we call the ranch, which is what I grew up on, which was a 16 2/3 acre ranch where we ran cattle and pigs. And I told my father one night, I told him, I said, we are going to get robbed. And he just looked at me and he said, is your antenna up? And I said, yes, it is. And I said, I can describe the guy and everything. And my dad said, what does he look like? And I said, he has long black hair. He's going to be wet. And my dad said, wet? How interesting. It's not supposed to rain. He said, well, what do you want to do about it? And I said, I'd like to sleep in my sleeping bag in the living room because he's going to come in that door. And my dad said, okay, that's fine. He said, take your gun with you because when you live in the country, you guard the door with a gun. And so I took my gun with me, and I'm laying in there in the living room, and the door opened just exactly when I thought it would, and he was standing there, and he was exactly how I described him. He had long dark hair. He was about 6 foot tall. He had on a green jacket, and I just hollered to my father, and I said, "Daddy, he's here." And my dad said, okay. And he, because I had already told him about it, he jumped up, he got his gun, and we held guns on him until the police came and arrested him for breaking in our house. Now, the bad thing about that was because I stopped him so soon, he could say he was going to the wrong house, it was an accident, blah, blah, blah. And so there was really nothing we could get him for as far as stealing anything from us because I stopped him so soon. But that did happen, and in effect, we were robbed 5 times at my parents' house, attempted robberies that I foiled because I knew they were coming. So,
My goodness, that's a lot of robbery. Do you know what he was going to take if he would have accomplished that robbery?
he never said what he was going to take. Now, we had a lot of beef. We had been robbed one other time where they did successfully do it, and they took all of our stuff out of our freezer because we harvested beef and pigs, and they took that and then all of the jewelry and other contents of the house, electronics, things like that. And they did that while we were at church
Hmm.
because we were so rhythmic with what we were doing every week, and as a result of that, they knew we'd be gone for church, and they came in and did that.
It's
So.
amazing because my parents had the very same thing happen to them. Now they lived out in the country. I don't know if you
Mhm.
lived in the country or not, but once again, they went to church every Sunday, and Sunday morning, someone robbed them, and there was a whole slew of houses in the neighborhood that were being robbed on Sunday mornings because they knew people would be at church. When they took meat, they took, some coins that they had, things like that. But it was quite a racket that people had going on in these country houses among church people at that time.
Yeah, I thought I said in the beginning of my talk there that we lived on a 16 and 2/3 acre ranch. It was in the country, definitely, and
Definitely
that
in the
no,
country. Yeah.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
no neighbors on either side for 5 miles.
Yeah.
So, so we definitely were prime suspect to be robbed because you could scream to high heaven, no one would ever hear you. So, but yeah, yeah, and for the longest time, my father, because he grew up in the country, believed you shouldn't have a lock on the door, and so we didn't even have a lock on the door. And he thought that it's a country, it's safe, we don't need a lock. And the first time he tried to get the insurance money for the robbery that they did accomplish, they wouldn't pay because Dad didn't have a lock on the door.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think my parents actually did have a lock on the door, but obviously it wasn't enough to detain them too far. So you said you had like 5 attempted robberies, and
yes.
none of them were successful because you knew when and where and how they were going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. As a matter of fact, the sheriff came out and he finally got a little bit upset because I was so young when this was happening. And here I am wielding a double barrel shotgun. And and he was like, can you handle that gun? And I said, sure I can. And my dad took me out there and I showed him that I could handle the gun and shoot it at a target and be accurate with it. And he got a little bit curious as to how I would knew these things. He said, "Are some of your friends doing this, older friends, or what's going on?" And I said, "No, I don't know any of these people." And when they did the investigation on the robberies, it was not people that we knew either. It was just people that had targeted us, for a robbery. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and none of them were the same people. They were all new
yeah,
robbers.
they were all
Each
different,
time. Yeah.
all
How many
different.
years apart was it between? these
Um, it,
incidents?
it usually ranged about every 2 years to 3 years, you know. One of them was a year and a half. So we got robbed real close then. And my father did put locks on the doors finally. And, but, uh, but yeah, it was just awful because of the location of our house. Still own that property to this very day. And the location of the house, like I said, no neighbors 5 miles either side and none across the street.
Mhm.
None. And so you're just so isolated that robbery is just going to happen.
Yeah,
You know.
that's true about that type of area. And did they always manage to enter the property, or did you stop them outside the house?
No, because of my age, my father wouldn't let me go outside. They did enter the property. I was the first time they robbed the house and I caught them, I was only 7. And then the second time I was 9. And so I was in the house.
Yeah,
So and I know that sounds young to be wielding a gun, but when you're young like that on the farm, you handle guns. You just do. So and ride tractors. I drove a tractor at 5 years old. So yeah, you just do. And that's part of growing up on a farm.
yeah,
So
exactly. It's just you learn a lot of things at a very young age. That
yes, yes. Hard work ethic and you contribute. Everyone's there to contribute. So yeah.
So you not only were able to deter robbers from entering the home, but you also saw accidents on occasion. There was one where your
Yes.
brother was in a terrible accident, and you saw that and told your parents. Well, tell me about that one.
Well, that was really interesting because my brother had just turned 15 years old and had his driving permit, and he was 5 years older than me, and uh, and I saw what happened so vividly. It was like a screen came out of my chest, and I saw it. It was bizarre, and I saw that he got into a car accident, and then he was cut straight down his face on his left eye through his eyelid, and I thought possibly taking his eye out. And I woke up and I woke my parents up and I said, Matthew's been in a car accident. And I said, and he's hurt pretty badly. I don't think mother should come and see him because he's hurt pretty badly. And you're going to have to go get him. My dad says, is your antenna up? I says, yes. And, uh, and then he says, when did this happen? Where? And then I told him, I said, it's on Pershing Street in Springfield, Missouri. And he's a block down the street. And my dad said, okay, he started getting dressed. Well, the phone rang about 3 to 5 minutes later, and it was my brother Matt, and he said, I've been in a car accident. It's pretty bad, and I'm cut down my eye. Everything I had said, and my father was like, "Yes, we've already heard. Melody told us." Well, my brother knew that I could see things too, and he said, "Tell mom not to come because I'm hurt pretty bad," and that's what we had both agreed on. That don't let mother see him in that condition. And so then my dad went and got him, and it was all true. But he was up and ready to go soon because of me.
Now, this was your older brother, is that right?
Yes, my older brother Matthew.
And how much older than you was he?
5 years older.
5 years older than you. Now, he knew you had these abilities too. Well, how did he feel about that? Was he like as rigid as your parents were about your capability of seeing things?
No, he liked to use that ability. He'd ask me questions and say, "Can you see this? Can you see that?" And he'd try to use my abilities, but I never have been able to make them happen. At least I don't know how. I'd love to learn how, but I don't know how to make it happen. Usually it just comes to me, and that's all I've ever done with it. Like I said, because of the religious background. So.
Yeah, and that's, most people that have this as a talent or just come in with it do that. It's a download, and they don't have so much control over it. It's just information that comes through spontaneously. But
Mhm.
normally it's important information. It's information that is relevant to you or a loved one or something that's going to happen that can help you. It's an assistant, in other words, to be able to have knowledge about something that would be useful, like this accident. But it wasn't just your older brother. You also had another accident that happened with another brother. Was this a different brother that?
This is a different brother, and I was much older. I had gotten married at a young age because back in my day, women got married really young. And I was married and living in North Carolina, and my brothers were in a rock and roll band. And they had decided to come out to North Carolina to play. They had gotten a tour out there, which I had helped book, and they went out to North Carolina. Well, all of a sudden, I was with my by myself, and I sat up in the bed and I saw it. I saw my brother go through the windshield, and it was just frightening as all get out. And I was just absolutely just taken aback, like you wouldn't believe, because I thought he might be dead, but he was thrown through the windshield. And then my father, at the same time, in a hotel room, did the same thing. He sat up and said he went through the windshield. I believe my father had this ability as well, but never recognized it. And anyway, so we got up, and then I saw where he was at on the highway, and I drove out there to him, and we found him in the grass out there laying in the grass before the ambulance got there, and were able to comfort him and do things for him that I believe saved his life. Otherwise he would not have made it. And it was pretty awful, but I was so glad I knew beforehand.
Yeah. Now, this was your younger brother.
Well,
And
he's still older than me, but younger than Matthew.
okay, so you had two older brothers, and this
Hmm.
was the youngest of the two older brothers. How did he feel about your gift, your talent?
He believed I had a tremendous talent, and he always trusted it. And him and I were very, very close. And he was always coming to me and saying, "What do you think, sis?" And asking me for to use my ability. And I used it a little bit, but never to a grand extent because I didn't know how. So, I'd love to learn how. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's what I teach people to do is to be able to get in touch with that and to be able to do it at will, which is a little different way of using it. But if it's already present, it's a whole lot easier than just starting from scratch, where you
mm,
don't have those spontaneous experiences. You can always open up to be able to get information at will. I say, on demand, ask a question, get an answer back, from that, which is kind of how I opened up a lot of my skills. Always had it, but like you, didn't have the ability to do it on command, with a dialogue back and forth, which is just a different skill with the same talent, but it's just a slightly different skill with it. So it can definitely be learned, absolutely. So you were really keen on these accidents, and there was a point in time where I believe that you were with your husband. You were much older at this time, and
yes.
there was an accident coming up, and you told him about it. So tell me about that one.
That was pretty funny. We were driving in the car, and you know how men are, they get upset when you try to tell them how to drive. And my husband thought I was trying to tell him how to drive, and I said, "You need to slow down." And he said, "I'm going the right speed, everything's fine." And I said, "No, no, we're going to be in an accident." Well, he didn't take it the way I meant it. He thought I was, cutting on his driving and saying that he was driving ineffectively, and that his driving was going to cause an accident. And I said, "No, that's not what I mean." So we began to kind of talk about it, and then we were driving along, and I said, "And there it is." And I saw her coming out of the parking lot, and she T-boned us, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh my goodness, I didn't what I thought you meant." And I said, "Yes, I know." I said, "We were going to be an accident. I could see it. And this is a bizarre thing, but it's kind of like a viewing screen. I've never told anybody this, but a viewing screen kind of comes out of my chest, and I can see what's going to happen, like a hologram. And I could see the car coming out of Home Depot, that it was going to T-bone us. I could see everything, and I knew that we weren't going to get physically hurt from the accident so much as the vehicle we were in was going to be damaged. And but it was awful. And then from then on, now my husband, he listens when I say, "Hey, we're going to be in an accident," because he knows I'm not cutting on his driving. I'm simply telling him something that's going to happen.
Well, that's a good point. After a time, I know my husband began to really believe in my ability to see things as well. And he began, asking me questions, like your brothers did. And, because he saw it too many times, it was just extremely accurate. And your story reminds me of a woman who was a student of mine. She had a similar experience. She was driving home on a road, a rural country road, but it was, a blacktop state road, and she was very specifically told to slow down because there was an accident over the top of the next hill. And she could have continued going at the same speed, or she could have slowed down. She opted to slow down, and luckily she did. When she topped the hill, there was an accident that had just happened, and she would have been head on into that if she'd not slowed down. So it was a warning of sorts, like you had with your husband. But she listened. She knew enough to listen to that and to be able to use it for benefit. This is why I have this problem with people who consider this to be evil when it seems to have only goodness at heart to help
Right.
us, to save us, to, to give us warnings and to be able to, to utilize it. Now, I know it's often that we get those spontaneous downloads when there is a warning of some sort. For me, I've taken it in the spy technique that I teach. I take it to a level where you can actually use it toward positive opportunities as well. So that's another area, another level of being able to utilize the talent. But it's the same talent. It's just using it towards something that is sitting out there present that you might want to take advantage of. And I know before this interview, you and I started talking about various investments and things, and you're an investor like I am, and being able to get a sense of what to do and what not to do with various investments is a very positive thing as well. So you at 14 had a kind of interesting morning with a group of students that you were with out in the country. This was kind of
Yes.
fun. Tell me about that.
It was a crazy story. We were all going down to the pump station. It was from Hillcrest High School, and every year when everyone graduated, they go down there and have a party and of course drink alcohol, which we shouldn't have been doing, but we were doing. And we all went down there, and then all of a sudden I could hear it, I could see it. I could see that there were three police officers headed our way. So I stood up on the picnic table and I announced it to everybody, and I said, guys, there's three police cars coming, and they're going to arrest us. We got to go. And so everybody started running, and then we got in the car, and as we were driving away, we counted them: one, two, three. Three police cars came by, exactly what I had said. Some of the students thought that I called the police because I knew so much about it, and I said, "How would I have done that? That was the time of no cell phones, no way to contact them." But I knew exactly when they were coming, and we got away, and it was absolutely wonderful for us because I didn't want to go to jail, and but some of the people were really skeptical, and then other people, like I said, called me a witch because they thought that I knew before it happened, and that was creepy. So
How did you
it was
feel about that? How did that make you feel that people were thinking of you as, practicing witchcraft or something?
Well, I didn't like that because I'm a staunch Christian, and I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as my Savior, and I'm a very staunch Christian, and I didn't like that they thought I was a witch, but I thought that the proof would be in the pudding. It would come out that I wasn't a witch, and that I just had a natural ability, because I believe that everybody has the ability to do this. They just don't know how to handle it, how to make it happen. And some people, I've always been told it's your third eye or something like that. I heard that before, and I don't know if their third eye has sleep in it or shut or whatever, but it's just not functioning correctly. And but I think everyone has the ability, and they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I think it's been shown, it's been proven, at least with the remote viewing program that they did out at SRI in California, that everyone had the skill, and it showed elements of learning, that you improve with practice, and that everyone has the ability to get in touch with it. Some people are better than others, of course. A lot of that has to do with your level of concentration, your brainwave states, that everyone has a signature brainwave pattern. I've had my brainwaves tested about 3 times now while I was doing this, and it's a signature pattern that enables this higher brainwave to be able to come in, and it's a lot the same brainwaves we use when we sleep at night, when we go into that kind of la la land. It's sort of a different world when we're sleeping than when we're consciously awake. But when you are fine tuned to those brainwaves, sometimes that information is more easily attained, and it just comes naturally to you. And
Hmm.
apparently in those brainwaves, we're looking at, past, present, and future, and it kind of mingles, so we can see things that are coming down the line in the future. It's not abnormal. We all go there when we sleep at night. It's very, very natural. Just that some people have a little bit more awareness of that when we're consciously awake.
Right.
So tell me about all of these incidences that happened to you where you were able to actually see disorders and disease in people's bodies. There was one that you talked about that you believe that you saved. I believe this was your husband, was it, or your partner anyway, where he was having an aneurysm of some sort.
Yeah, that's right. He had pain in his knee, and I said, well, I can touch it. I've been able to touch things and been able to tell what's going on in there. It feels like a Christmas bubbler to me when you have an aneurysm. I know that's a strange thing to say, but that's what it feels like. The old time Christmas bubbler that my great grandmother used to have on the tree, and you hold on to it and it goes bubble, bubble, bubble. Well, my husband had an incident where he was having pain in his knee, and I grabbed hold of his knee and I touched it and I said, "There's an aneurysm in your knee." And he said, "Oh, really?" And I thought, how do I convince his doctor that there's something going on in there without telling him what I'm saying? He'll think I'm insane, you know. And so we go to the doctor, and I finally I talked to his nurse practitioner, and I said, "I know it's there." And she said, "Well, I have to come up with a code, a code to write down to in order to test him for this." And I said, "Write down anything. I know it's there." Well, she didn't believe me, and she sat there and fussed over the code and fussed over. Finally, they found out it was an aneurysm, and then it happened even more so when he ended up having an aneurysm rupture, and they took him to the hospital, and I had told them, it's an aneurysm, and they were looking for everything else in his body. They thought it might be appendicitis, they thought it might be everything else, and finally I stood up and I said, "It is an aneurysm." And the guy said, "To shut her up, let's look for that." And it was. And then he came over to me and he shook me and he said, "How did you know?" Well, I didn't know what to say to him on how I knew. I just said, "I just knew. It's genetic." I said, "That's one thing I do know. They're genetic." And he said, "Well, that doesn't give you a big enough clue." He said, "I want to help other people. Tell me how you knew." Well, I was afraid to tell him the truth, so I didn't tell him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you know,
it's very intimidating when you move into the medical field and you have people with great educations, great authority, and knowing what they know. And I really appreciate that they do. But I know working as a health intuitive for 30 years, I remember being in that situation a few times. And a friend of mine, I got a call that he was in a coma in the hospital in intensive care, and they asked if I would take a look and see what I could see. And what I saw in his system, I mean, his system was literally beginning to shut down, but there were a few areas that I could see that they could revive, and it would probably restart it, but he would be in a coma for several days. And they were looking, like you said, they were looking for everything but, what I was seeing. It was between his liver and his pancreas and his kidneys, there was a real fight as to which one was going to get the most energy to live. And so they needed to calm that down a bit or do some things, that would help. They took that information and gave it to his physician. And within a day, they were doing tests on the very things that I had seen, and come to find out it was all correct. He was in the coma for several days. I saw him coming out of that and that he would be fine, but it would take a long time for him to get his strength back.
yeah,
He'd just gone into a really, really deep, almost death state. And my specialty was getting the mind body relationship, because I think our body isn't isolated to just a mechanical physical system. And I could see there were a lot of personal things happening in his life that kind of took him deep into this. Now, it was a viral condition as well, I believe, that was there, but it kind of took him deep, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to come back or not. He really hadn't made up his mind yet if he wanted to live, because there again, he had some challenges personally that were happening with him. Obviously, he decided to live. Thank God, he's alive and well today, and gained his strength back, and all is well. And he moved through some of those personal challenges as well, comfortably. But it was all a package deal. And for the emergency room doctors to be able to hear that and to take that to heart, sometimes when a physician doesn't know where to turn, they're going to take whatever information is available. I have a lot of physicians that bring their children to me because they know the limitations of the medical community. And so they'll say, "Okay, what do you see?" And it sounds like you're a lot like that. You can see things, you can know things. And it hasn't been just that one incident. You've had many incidences. I see that yet. When you were 26, you saw someone, I believe it was your friend or your neighbor, that had some cancer.
yes, yeah. I I've done it so many times that it's hard to keep all the stories. I don't know which one I told you in the thing I wrote to you, but I can tell you another one. I was waiting tables when I was in college, and a girl came up to me and she said, "I've been having pain in my abdomen." and I said, have you? And she said, well, aren't you in pre-medical school? And I said, well, kind of. I said, I'm a biologist, but okay. And she says, well, something's going on. I said, well, let me touch you. I said, let's go in the back room and I'll touch you and see what I can see. I touched her and she had a tumor. I could feel it. And it was on her ovary. And I told her, I said, you've got a tumor on your ovary and it's about to rupture. I said, you need to get to the hospital right away. Well, that scared her. And so she went to the hospital. And then the doctor there told her that it was impossible that I had to be some kind of a weirdo or witch or something because it was impossible for me to have felt that through her stomach. And so she was afraid of me for the rest of the time I worked with her because I diagnosed her like that. But it's like I told her, I said, you asked me to do it. Don't be afraid of me for something you ask for. And and I said, I'm not going to hurt you or anything. I said, I just knew it was there, and I told you, and it saved her life. It was going to rupture and kill her. So, but yeah. And then my husband, when he got here to when we first started getting together, he had a spot on his arm, and I said, well, we don't need that. And I said, that is cancer. There's no doubt about it. And he said, I don't think it is. And I said, no, I'm sure it is. And I laid hands on that and prayed for him. I'm able to do this too, which I'm not sure what this is called, but I laid hands on him and prayed for him, and it disappeared the next day. So I'm not sure what you call that either, but that's just something that I've been able to do also. So
Well,
uh,
my grandfather was also a hands-on healer through the church that they believed in. So I came down through this particular skill, perhaps, and in multiple ways. This is just kind of another level of that hands-on healing. But it was through prayer and through faith, that a lot of that happened, and he had some miraculous things occur. My father kind of got that same gift, that same ability, to do that. And I
right.
think I think having the knowledge of health is just one more level of that same capacity where you're at a higher vibration of healing. So laying on of hands just transfers that higher vibration. But also when as we talked about earlier, those brain waves, when you're at those higher brainwave levels, also it's a higher level of knowledge or information that you're getting in, as well as a higher level of healing energy that works. I think this is something that society should embrace and
Yeah.
learn because it's such a valuable thing. There again, we've become kind of dummied down in lots of ways by not using this rather than using it. And people in the church, by all means, can, we believe in praying for people. We believe in asking God for advice and information. So I think we can put it in our Christian beliefs just as easily as not. It doesn't have to be out there in the limb and witchcraft.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's just like that girl I worked with. She always kind of stepped around me and she was a little bit afraid of me. And because the doctor had told her it was impossible for me to know that. And she said, well, she's the one that told me. So she knew firsthand that I did tell her. I did tell her exactly what was wrong with her. It was spot on. And then the doctor told her it was impossible. So I don't know what his thought was on telling her that, but did make her feel very afraid of me from then on, which I think it's fear of the unknown. People get fear of the unknown.
They do. And I think it's just a lack of wanting to accept that there might be information out there they're not aware of. I know I had a man who was a psychologist. He had a client that had this very same skill, and it was just a natural, normal thing that she was dealing with. But she also had some issues that she was talking to him about. But he didn't understand this because in their traditional training as a psychologist, there was nowhere that this belonged other than mental illness. So he began to look at her and he couldn't find any signs of mental illness whatsoever. There was nothing about this woman that indicated that there was any kind of psychosis or any kind of stepping out of reality in any other way. So he came to me, working in the field as I was, to try to understand this. But I think it's really sad that we don't have an educational system that can incorporate understanding more about the human mind as it works in the areas that you and I have experienced it and lived very normal, natural lives. We're not like
Right.
out on a limb crazy. We both run businesses and we're investors and we live a very grounded life. very caring, people. We just have this ability to see things and to know things. And I think it would be good if we brought that into more of a natural way of viewing it rather than to be afraid of it or to immediately assume that it's just impossible and doesn't exist and that we're just making it up.
I totally agree with you. I think it could be used to our benefit so much so. And the people that reject it, I think, are really missing something. I really do think they are.
Absolutely. And, I've spent 30 years in trying to teach people and to help people, to attain that very thing. Now, there was another incident where you actually, saved, I believe it was your husband's life because he had pneumonia. Was that your husband or your father?
That's my father.
Your father. So
Yeah.
he had pneumonia and wasn't going to do a lot about it, but you could see more beneath the surface there.
Yeah. Well, went out to see my father. My mother had passed away and he was living the bachelor life. And he was pretty excited about that. And he was out there and hadn't been feeling well. And I went out there two or three times and I was suspect that he was getting sicker. Well, I sat out there and suddenly I heard it. I can hear pneumonia when someone's breathing. And I could hear him. And I said, Daddy, you've got pneumonia. And he said, he looked at me and he goes, What makes you think that? He said, You're sitting way over there. How do you know that? And I said, My antenna's up. And he said, Oh, okay. And he said, Well, do I need to go to the hospital? I said, Yes, you do. And so I talked to him and talked to him. It took him 2.5, almost 3 hours because he did not want to go to the hospital to be convinced to go. When we finally got him there, he not only had pneumonia, but he had sepsis and from the pneumonia. And he was so close to death's door, it was unbelievable. The doctor said to me that if I hadn't have brought him in, he definitely would have passed away that evening. And he thanked me for it. He said, I don't know how you knew that, but okay, And I don't know how I knew it either. I just did. I just knew. And I can't, that wasn't the big scream that I see coming out of my chest. It's just, I got a word. He's got pneumonia and he's going to die, and you better take him. So, but I don't know how I got that other than that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I found that a lot of nurses tend to be very open to this because they are right there in the throes of disorders that they have to deal with every day. And oftentimes they will have that antenna up. They will know when someone's getting almost near death's door, when they need to call in a doctor. They have a real awareness. I've taught a lot of nurses to be more attuned to that body mind relationship and to be more attuned to their own intuition to be able to have that information. I've taught some doctors, not as many as nurses, but some doctors also, they're aware that there is a knowledge beyond what just our five senses and all of their equipment and their testing can tell us. There's a
Right.
knowledge there, and that's what you and I seem to be, connected with. Now, also, your uncle, I believe, had some issues at one time that you also potentially helped him with and saved his life. Was the lymph node rather than cancer
Yes.
or something?
Yes. Yes. That was very interesting. He uh he was having trouble breathing and had a terrible time. We ended up taking him to the ER and they admitted him into the hospital. Once he got into the hospital, they'd start doing a bunch of testing and things, and they discovered this knot in his chest. Well, they just decided that he had mesothelioma, he had cancer, and that knot in his chest was cancer. And they came into the room and they brought the x-rays and they were explaining it to him. And I got a word and I looked at it and I said, did you know that he came in here with a bacterial infection? And he said, No, I didn't know that because he was an oncologist that had been called in. They hadn't told him, the previous things that were going on. And I said, Yeah, he did. And I said, I don't mean to disrespect you, but to me, this looks like a lymph node, not cancer. He stood there and looked at me and he said, Oh my goodness, I think you may be right. And then he grabbed the x-ray, ran out of the room, and he said he came back in about 30 minutes later and he said, Scratch everything I said, she's right. And they were getting ready to do chemotherapy, radiation, and a surgery on him. And my uncle grabbed me and hugged me and he said, Thank you so much. Because do they were going to cut out part of his lung and that lymph node, and it was terrible. But he found out that that's not what it was at all. It was just a swollen lymph node.
Yeah, exactly. I know people that I trust immensely to be able to see inside my system and know things more accurately, even than some of the testing does. But it's good to use both. It's certainly, I trust the medical community, but I also trust the intuitives that I know as well. And it's good to use both, I think,
Mhm.
in that sort of thing. Because They can be wrong. It's not always 100% accurate. It sounds like you've had a really good run of accuracy, however.
I usually don't say much unless I'm absolutely positive. I get feelings about other people sometimes, and I just don't say anything. But that there again, that's because of my upbringing and my background, and never being around people that accepted it. Most of the people that I was around were very converse and very negative towards anything that you knew in advance. They all thought it was evil, and that it came from the devil. It didn't come from God, and that you should suppress it. Don't even listen to it. It's familiar spirits talking to you. It's bad things. So I've been taught that most of my life, and so it's when I hear it so loudly I can't ignore it, is when I talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So when you went off to college and you were maybe around, other people rather than the rigidness of maybe this Midwest country, setting that you grew up in and your parents' religious values, did you find that anyone that you met had any kind of interest in the subject matter, or did it just never come up?
I didn't hang around those kind of people. I was really more of the evangelical Christian crowd, and never really got into that at all. I had one friend that she's the one that told me about the Ron Institute, coming to the college and asking for people to uh, come and be tested, and I needed the money, as I said, and that's why I did it. But she was the one friend that had a little bit of interest in it, but not much. I mean, it wasn't very broad spectrum. Uh, so no, I didn't really find that much about it in college. That it wasn't talked about or anything in the subject I was in, but I was in the hard science fields and things like that. I didn't take any of the electives of things where it may have been mentioned, but yeah, so no.
Exactly. So, when you went to the Rhine Institute, what was your response to them telling you had all this, even though you knew you had it, obviously, and you'd been aware of it all of your life, but what was your response to them showing you that that the test returns so accurately?
I had a great relief that I wasn't evil, that I wasn't of Satan, that I wasn't that familiar spirits were not conducting in my life, and that it gave me a relief. It made me feel good about me. It made me feel like that there were other people that could do it. It gave me an interest in it. My husband of 21 years, he's very interested in it and has read a lot of books about it. And he has been a big comfort to me, telling me that what I'm doing is just normal, and that everyone can do it, and that I'm just more gifted than others, and things like that. And it has been a grand relief to talk about it too. Just like when you asked me to come on here and talk about it, I thought it was a great relief to be able to tell someone, yes, I can do this without being ashamed, and without being fearful that someone's going to lock me up in the institution because I'm crazy for doing something like this. And so it's just been a grand relief, especially the Rhine Institute. That really helped a lot, because to me that was a an accredited, good organization, that was a college institute that could say for sure this is a factual thing that happens to everybody, not just you. You are not having a demonic experience. So,
Can
so no.
imagine that would be really scary to think that there is something wrong, that you're embarking on or connected to something that is against your values and your principles religiously, and all the goodness that's attached to that, and for something like this to enter your mind. I can't say that I had that kind of experience. I don't think that I viewed this as being totally evil by any means, even though I don't think it would have been highly embraced either by my church or necessarily my family. But I don't think that they would have felt like it was a horrible thing either. It was something there again. I never was at odds with those two things, and I think that was a blessing to me, to be able to view the things that I could see as being something that was godly rather than not.
Mhm.
And if we look at the, biblical things, if we look at, religious context with, seeing prophetic things, I mean, there were prophets in the Bible, and and there were many people that actually could do this, and
No.
it wasn't evil. But I think it's, you have to keep it in context of love and caring, about yourself, and obviously it has been a blessing to you in the end of the day. to have been able to save people's lives and to be able to diagnose things. And even though you couldn't technically diagnose things, to be able to have that kind of existence that was useful to in the
Yes.
way that you used it. So
Yes.
what's the
Yes.
most recent, what's the most recent thing that's happened to you that you can tell us about? Most of these things have happened back in time. Do you get things very often today?
Yes, I do. I still get things that happen today. I'll get things like the car accidents and things like that. I know when someone's going to pass away. I just got a word recently that someone's going to pass away, and I found out they're ill. I didn't know they were, and I know they're going to pass away, and I can pretty much tell you when too. And but I never know what to do with that information, other than just be aware and be ready. Um, I know it wouldn't do any good to tell that person, hey, you're going to die at such and such time, but uh, I don't know. What do you do with that information? Do you know?
Well, I think in a case like that, I would just, hold on to it as well. There's probably
Yeah.
little you can do. It is if it were a situation where that it could be turned around, like an accident or something like that. And oftentimes in situations like that, you can turn it in another direction. But when
Mhm.
it's just, they're ill, they're going to, to pass, there's probably very little that can be done. But there again, that this is one of the values in being able to have that interactive dialogue with this skill is, if you get that information, which I don't usually get downloads on desks like that, but if you do get that information, I would be saying, what should I do with this? And see what
Yeah.
other piece of information comes in case there is something that you can't do. Which a lot of people don't realize that they can open up to the second level of that is being able to open up that dialogue where there is more advice that can begin to come in with that, which is a really good skill to have. But I don't think I would tell them unless I got further information that something that I could say or do would be a benefit to them and could
Right.
maybe can change that outcome in some way. But I do know the future's not set in stone. We can change outcomes. I do that, often seeing something that's coming down the line. Do we want to take that in a positive state or negate it or stay away from someplace or go someplace or do something with it? I know that it's not set in stone. A good friend of mine got a warning dream the other night, and she didn't ask when she woke up the next day, okay, how can I prevent this from happening? But if she would have, she might have been able to prevent it from happening. It was one of those situations she could have prevented it from happening. Because she
Wow.
didn't, she just had the dream. She thought it was set in stone and it would just happen as it would. And it did. It was a relatively minor thing, but still she could have prevented it probably if she had just paid attention to how she could have prevented it. So I think sometimes we can do that too. That's where that second piece of the layer of it, that information as it comes in, oftentimes in a dream, we can turn that around, we can change it, we can make other choices in that moment, which will help us to avoid some things like your husband in the T-boning car accident. If he
Yeah.
would just slow down a little bit, he
We
could
wouldn't have
have
been in
avoided
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, that which is a good thing for us to know. Well, what have we not covered? I know you've determined a lot of pregnancies, and you said that you get a feeling when someone doesn't even maybe know they're pregnant yet, and
Yeah.
and you get a
Yeah.
feeling about
Yeah.
the pregnancy.
I can feel the presence of another being. I know that sounds bizarre, but it's the truth. They come into the room. I look at them. I can see it in the picture. If I have a photograph of them, I can feel the presence of another being, and I know they're pregnant. Um, for instance, one of uh, my husband's niece was pregnant, and she hadn't told anyone, and didn't want to be pregnant. And she hadn't found out for sure from the doctor yet. And she came over and hugged me. And I said, "Oh my goodness, you're pregnant." And she said, "What?" And looked at me and I said, she goes, "You're better than an EPT test." And I said, "Well, um, yeah, I can tell you're pregnant. I can feel the presence of the baby." And she said, "Well, that's not good news, but thank you anyway." And I said, "Okay." And I'm not sure what that is about that, but I do. I feel the presence of another being, and I can see it, feel it. And usually, if I touch someone, it's all over. I definitely know.
I remember doing a health intuitive session for someone once, and I could hear two heartbeats, and she didn't even know she was pregnant yet. No one knew she was pregnant yet, but I could hear two heartbeats happening within her system. I didn't know for sure if that meant she was pregnant or not, but she was indeed pregnant at that time. So, I'm more auditory than anything else. I hear things a lot, whether that be a sentence that comes in, a knowing that comes in, but I will hear things a lot, be very auditory with my skill too. So yeah, I know that's possible. And also seeing, the future of someone. I remember once I was doing a health reading for a lady, or just an intuitive session for a woman who was at my home, and I didn't know her. I guess the first time I'd met her. She had a daughter who was pregnant, and she said, "Tell me about my grandchild that wasn't even born yet." And I looked at the grandchild, and a lot of information started coming in. But the first thing I saw was that this child was going to have an early health issue. And I didn't diagnose. I didn't say what it was, but it would be a health issue. But not to worry that child would overcome that health issue, but it would be something that the child would have to deal with in the first year of their life. I also saw that they were very open, a lot like you and I. They would be very, very aware, and a lot of information would come through them, and they would be just knowledgeable as a very young child. And that would be kind of scary to this child's mother, but the mother would adapt eventually, because the child would just have awarenesses that she wouldn't be able to explain to herself. And also that the child would just have a really, really exuberant personality, just kind of a hyper personality. And that was also something that the mother would have to adjust to, but it would be something that they would all do well with eventually. So it was years, maybe 5 years later, that the mother of this child came to my home for a group meeting when we were doing intuitive work. And I didn't know that this was who was sitting there. It was a young woman, and she had a young child, not with her, but she had a young child. But I didn't have any idea that this was the same young child that I viewed before he was even born. And she started explaining that he had cancer at a really young age. To get over that, he had all kinds of awarenesses. He saw angels around, and they told him things. And he had a real hyper, personality. It was kind of difficult for her to deal with. And then she looked at me and she said, "It was just like you saw it to be." And then I realized, when she explained this, oh, this is that reading that I did a long time ago, about 5 years before, for this child that wasn't even born yet. But all of these things happened in this young child's life. And then full circle, the mother came and was able to verify all of that for me. So that was a very interesting moment. And it sounds like you've had some of those same very interesting things happen to you, and you've had it all of your life. And I'm really glad you've come to terms with that and not place that in too evil of a category and tried to suppress it, because all of the people that you helped saves many people's lives, was able to prevent robberies from your home. All of these things would not have happened had you suppressed that information.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good thing. And I think that my parents and the people that are misguided, I will put it that way, that they're misguided, that they believing it's evil is just absolutely wrong. And that I believe it's a gift from God, not something bad. So,
Absolutely. I feel the same way. It's like my early childhood years in the Christian church only enhanced, I feel like, the powers that began to speak with me and come through me. It was all the same extended energy that I think I learned as a young child in church.
yeah,
So, well, thank you. Melody, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I, I can't think of anything. You've been very thorough.
Yeah, I think so. We covered a lot of information, and goodness, you've had a life filled with such wonderful things happening to you. I really appreciate you sharing those with us and encouraging people that hopefully, if someone out there is listening to this and they have this gift, they're able to see things, that they own it wholeheartedly and not try to suppress it, but own it and use it in wonderful, positive ways.
Yes, I agree. I would say
Well,
they should definitely do that.
and I want to thank you, and I want to thank my audience also for watching today. And please like, share, subscribe so we can keep the channel going. And we will see you next time.